Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to our next edition of HR Breakfast USA. And as ever, I'd like to welcome my fabulous team around me. Callie, good morning.
Good morning.
And Toby, good
Good
afternoon.
morning, afternoon.
Sort of swap it up there. So today, we've come up with so many ideas for discussion topics, and one that Toby came up with is what we're going to dive into today, which is how much life is left in internal email. And it's interesting, isn't it, when we look at this, because when you look at what Shopify did at the beginning of the year in terms of internal meetings, banning all internal meetings that had two people or less. Thursdays were, internal meeting day. They've increased productivity by something like 33%. I can only imagine what would happen with emails. How much life do we think is left in the internal email, and how should, no, wrong question. How can we be using them better? I'm going to start with Callie on this one.
So where my mind goes is we first need to recognize that no one's reading them anyway, right? So you got this giant study that had millions and millions of emails, and 30% of people right out of the gate said, yeah, I don't read internal emails. But what they actually found was 70% of employees don't read internal emails. And of the 30% who actually did, only 24% would even click on an attachment in the email. And so starting out from saying no one's doing it already, we know that people are coming back asking the same questions. I think it's time we acknowledge that it's dying and be proactive about it. Do I think it's entirely going to disappear? Not fast enough. But that is where I would like to start the conversation.
Ooh,
Well, if there's a young man in the audience called James Robinson, who I will tag, he took me to task on my prediction I made in 2020 that by the year 2030, that this would be the decade, essentially, that internal emails killed off. He told me, I was working with him at the time, that was absolute rubbish, and then started to send me a load of emails. So if he is watching, I think he has a point, but I also think I have a point, and we have a point that we're talking about today, is that yeah, no one's looking at it. No one's looking at them. Like it's kind of weird, right? So, well, I think we've talked about companies labeling themselves as one big family before, not a thing. But imagine if you worked with a group of people, or you existed with a group of people in your personal life called your family. How often do you email like those people to get stuff done? Like, I was just thinking about it just then. It's like, maybe I should send my wife an email to get this done. And you're like, no, that would be stupid. Even someone I do business with, she messages me sometimes, like on WhatsApp, going, why did you just send me that in an email? Why didn't you just like message me like a normal person? And I was like, yeah, maybe I should. So I think there's that element of creating a more human way of communication. The email, if we look, I always kind of use the trends from outside of work to predict what's going to happen inside of work. Emails now outside of work are just a vehicle for marketeers to give you newsletters, discount codes, and I don't know, phishing emails is essentially what all that resides there. There are some people who send me emails. I'll be very careful. There are some people out there who send emails to my personal email address, and they are they're over 60. Let's put it that way. Wow, well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out who those people are. I just hope they're not watching. So, but they send me emails, right? But that's because it's of a time and a place, and I think it's like letters. You know, those things, we used to put things in envelopes and write addresses and stamps, right? Like you need a location to send something to somewhere. So an email address is really handy, but the proliferation of other platforms to communicate and collaborate with someone outside of work means that's only going to happen sorry to go on, but it's like it's already happened. Teams, Slack, whatever WhatsApp is used. Every single client I've worked with, when you talk to their employees, one of their primary communication channels is Slack. Did the company, not Slack, was WhatsApp, did the company buy a version of WhatsApp for the company? No. Everyone has just gone, I'm just going to WhatsApp my colleagues because it's easier. So the proliferation of technology means it's got to die at some point. Probably won't die outside the work because it's like your unique identifier in the internet. So you'd have to reinvent that whole system. But inside work, yeah, let's bin it off.
I think you're right in terms of the internal. And here's the interesting thing, I suppose, because of my generation, you know, when it comes to external, I will follow up with external emails with very clear, this is what we talked about, this is our next step. So there's no confusion, you know, we've got absolute clarity for things. But when it comes to that internal piece, you're right. It is about the Teams, it is about the WhatsApp. And here's the thing, because we've now got so many things in place that we can use, there's the added danger now of people spending a lot of time on different platforms just to make sure that we're caught up. So there's another piece here, isn't there, which is, yay, we've got loads of other ways now of communicating, but we've got to be crystal clear. If we're saying internally no to email, then having 2 to 3 different channels is actually probably even more dangerous, because things that people should be seeing, they could miss.
I don't know. It's for me, it's kind of a head game, right? Of like what I have to do from an external standpoint or a workload stance takes precedence over anything internal. And so what ends up happening for me then is I say, oh, I'll get back to that later. But the world goes on at such a fast pace that may or may not actually happen. So to me, being able to have a place for internal communication versus a place for external communication separate makes it infinitely easier to manage the lanes effectively rather than confusing the two of them.
And I think you know, your point about giving clarity is where we want people who say no to the internal email to end up. But what happens if they're in that kind of in-between phase? We need real clarity, and okay, we're going to move from here to here in a timely fashion, and we know that this is all going to get lost over here whilst we do so.
Yeah.
So it's almost
I'm nodding in agreement. I missed the past minute because my internet dropped out. So I'm like, yeah, good point. Yes, seamless.
On that point, please elaborate, Toby.
I think in today's society that's just indicative of how we're all operating. Does that work? That probably
actually
works.
That fits perfectly.
How do you do that?
I'm not even here. This is a pre-recorded version of me that just I just line up sound bites and hope that you're saying the right things, and generally you both are, so it's fine.
Just nodding to yourself, like that seems like a long rant from Callie, so just stretch it out a little longer.
But who then takes ownership for where we're going from a productivity point of view with the internal email and that paper trail perspective? Should that in the future, for example, sit with a chief network officer? Who's responsible for that communication piece of it?
I think internal comms probably have a lot to answer for. I've worked with a few internal comms teams. I'm not saying they're bad, but what you don't have the opportunity to do, as you would with like MailChimp or HubSpot, is track the effectiveness of your emails, like your click-through rate, open rate, you know, what areas the email are dwelling on. Like no comms team I've worked with from an internal perspective has ever analyzed their own communications to that regard, whereas a marketeer does it just as standard, like a very basic level. So the problem is that there's no evaluation of whether the technique is working or not. It's just assumed that people are looking at it. And then you'll always have those conversations around the water coolers like, oh, did you not see the email? No, I didn't see the email. I didn't see the email either. And like, you're just hoping that one person sees it and spreads the news to other people, not that everyone will open it, but it's not quantified by data. So it's really hard to track and evaluate the impact of email. No, it isn't. It's very easy. Just people need to do it. But to the point where's the data in the organization that tells you email's kind of a wasted communication channel? Well, there isn't. So you're never going to stop. So it's probably something to do with data analytics, I would say. Full stop.
Callie, what have you got to add to that before I've got a question for Toby on that one?
We have to think about the type of communication that we're providing or what the need for the communication is, because there are ways of tracking the completion of projects depending on what that project is, right? If you have to complete a training, you've got that sign off that you did the training. If it's enrolling in benefits or something else like that, you've got that confirmation that this person has completed what they're doing. And so maybe my solution is more in making sure that what you're providing is more action based, even if it's adding a, check the box confirmation, we've got something that we're doing, rather than putting something out into the void and assuming that alone is hitting the needs of why we're communicating what we're communicating.
Yes. Now that makes sense. And when Toby, to your point about the data analytics piece, are you, in your mind, are you seeing that they are the ones who have steered the direction in which this goes from a strategic point of view? Who do you see are the main stakeholders then in terms of managing that internal comms?
It's probably got to go. It's kind of got to go right from the top, I guess. But no CFO, COO, COO is likely to act just on vibe alone. I feel like if it was me, I'd kind of go, I got a hunch that email's going to die. Let's just kill it off internally. Done. Whereas what you're kind of looking for is someone to provide you that information that it isn't working, and then act on it. So who's collating that information? The people in your organization that look after your employee data, and your platforms as well. So there's probably a bit of IT in there as well. But I think email is so boilerplate in an organization that IT probably aren't going to flag it, because it's just okay, I'm doing IT for a company. Let's get some email sorted because that's what we need. And therefore, no one's ever going to actually switch off email in an organization, because it's quite useful to talking between companies, right?
Yeah.
So IT is probably not going to change it because you can't switch it off. Or you could probably put a blocker maybe on if someone sends me an email from inside my business, send them an out of office. That would change pretty quickly. But that then you're going to apply that as a global setting. So you can even provide IT the data. They're not going to turn it off. That would be silly. So I don't know. Whoever's in charge of communication and collaboration to get work done, and this is why I go with internal comms, because it's the only one I can see that kind of has any form of ownership over internal email. No other department really does, I guess. I may be wrong, but I can't imagine anyone's clamoring for it, going, oh, I want to look after internal email. Give it to me. Ain't nobody asking for that.
What if you don't have a comms team?
Well, then it's just like the Wild West, isn't it? It's this is why I kind of go back to business leadership, that it's probably the leadership of the company that's going to do it. And it's and this is where, especially over the next 10 years, there will be companies that sink or swim depending on their agility and adoption of technology. And that is also, on the flip side, getting rid of your legacy technology as well. And large companies are horrendous at getting rid of their legacy technology.
Yeah.
Why? Because it probably took them 3 to 4 years to implement it in the first place, and was a multi-million-dollar project. So we're not likely to unplug it. And it's but the world moves faster than that. So you've got to A, become smarter at implementing it, and B, become smarter at unimplementing it. And I saw, this was 4 years ago, there's a founder or two founders who started the Subway of burritos here in the UK, called Chilango. I don't know if they're still going actually, but they do very nice burritos. Anyway, that company was set up by 2 IT people. I'm gonna have to do my research because that sounds very generic. 2 people who are very good at computers. And essentially they had this monthly cycle of being able to plug in and unplug technology from their organization. It was built into their operating rhythm. So their people were used to technology moving and changing on a regular basis. Nice small chain of restaurants in London, that makes sense. But you then kind of go, the bigger you get, the harder that is to do. The perception that it's harder to do. So if you haven't baked that in before you've got to that mega huge stage, then it's going to be really hard to put it in. So yeah, the leadership of the company, in short.
When you were talking about the burrito company, it reminded me of a trucking company that I got to work with like 5 years ago. And of course, truckers and emails, not a very compatible combination. And so what they did is they launched a podcast. And so every week they would have a new episode trying to further bring in and engage those drivers in a broader community within the company, because they were off doing their own thing so much, but also that was how they chose to communicate. I mean, it's not foolproof, right? Like, you maybe have a little bit of insight as to who is listening to those, and hopefully you have a good number of employees who are taking the time to tune in. But I thought it was fun to see someone who is not in an industry that's known for being sort of forward thinking, or, you know, even working that hard from an employee standpoint, doing things so differently so that they could try to engage their population and keep them around longer.
Yeah, and I think that's, Callie, that's actually a really good point, isn't it? Because we've not only have you got the multiple generations now in the workforce, so you've got people like me who are, okay, get it, completely with that. There's an element of, you know, perhaps there's a mid ground here to how we use it, rather than completely throw it out. But you've also got people who will use it in a different way. You know, you're not going to have a company of truck drivers. If nothing else, it's just blooming dangerous for them to be able to check their emails like that with the kind of work that they've done. And that's where things like some of these platforms, and, you know, Toby, you and I have been talking about apps and connecting people that way. It's also made me think, since our conversation, I think some of these larger organizations will deploy and build their own tailored apps that are right for them. And that then becomes really interesting in terms of that employee branding. Oh, you know, you want to go there, they've got this great platform, they do this, this, and this on it as well. It all then becomes part of that employee branding.
I'm going to agree and disagree with you.
Go on.
I agree there are going to be companies that build their own apps, but I disagree that it's the right thing to do. Like, that's such a stupid idea. But not from you, from the company to invest that amount of time and resource to develop an app. But they're arrogant enough to assume that, oh, we can build a really good app. Hey, bud, guess what? If you've got an idea for an app, I can guarantee it's probably already been made. Like, this is me talking to the founder of the company. I'm not calling you bud. So that's incredibly informal for a Monday morning. Hey, bud.
This was the last episode of Make Our Breakfast USA.
I called you bud and stupid in one go. This is me talking to the company. So, really, please do not use this as my hot take for the week. This is live TV, isn't it? My mind is unfolding before everybody's eyes. No, so in all seriousness, like, if a company has an idea to develop an app for its own employees, they're probably coming at it from a really good point. But no company generally is so unique that it needs a very specific app for that organization. In fact, I just read this book and it's on the floor next to me. There's a really cool chapter in there that says, like, induction takes so long, not because an individual isn't very good, it's because the company is doing the stuff that person is really good at in such a fundamentally different way to they've ever done it, that it's so hard to learn. That's an organizational design problem, not a problem on the employee, and not a problem really training or an induction program is necessarily going to fix. So once you apply that lens, it's like all jobs are pretty much the same. All people are pretty much the same. All organizations are pretty much set up the same. Therefore, the shortcut here is like the technology probably already exists. And this is a really neat way to segue to Callie. But like, if you try and develop your own platform, because we talked about it, every organization I've worked at for the past 4 companies has talked about it. And I have removed myself from that project because I'm like, you're just going to develop something that already exists. So yeah, does that make sense without trying to be so offensive to Sam? I apologize if it came across as rude.
No, you didn't at all. It was fine, but I've got images of you now sitting in front of someone going, listen, bud, that's not a good idea.
It's
Anyway.
the informality. Well, I'm having a bad hair day, so I put my hat on, and I was like, all of a sudden now I've become this bro, just like, oh yeah, this is now the Seth Rogen podcast. Oh, I'm a bit.
Can you
punchy.
call Green Bay Packers fans bros?
Wow. No, you can't. You're right.
It's like, that's, you know, considering I'm in Minnesota, it's really fighting words just wearing the hat.
Well, yeah. Hello, my household.
No, I think you're right. I mean, that's in my experience. So I've been working with groups who are working to exist or to integrate a technology that takes 20 minutes to set up, right? We intentionally designed it that way because implementations are terrible and we waste so much time and energy. So let's focus on the next layer, which is how you get your people to engage and adopt the technology that you worked so hard on. And I think part of the problem of why we're so ineffective to begin with is we put all this energy into getting ready to show it to employees that we're totally burnt out and over it by the time we ever get to that stage, versus recognizing that that's the crucial stage, is getting that employee buy-in and doing all those things. But at that point, we're also too invested to take any meaningful feedback, and we get really aggressive when someone tells us we haven't done it right, which we can't know until we've taken the time to get it out in front of people. And so being able to build off of someone else's success with figuring out how to do that and not recreating the wheel, to Toby's point, I think is just, you're starting off with such a better approach than focusing so much time, energy, and resources before you ever get close to introducing it to anyone.
And that's why there's a tech bust, right? Is that there's so much stuff out there that is so similar. And the thing I always point back to is like Clubhouse. Like, so many people were going, Clubhouse, go on Clubhouse. I don't know why I'm doing the voice. Apologies. Clubhouse, go on Clubhouse. It's the place to be.
Here's the hot
here. Oh, no. And then here we are, like 2 or 3 years later. It's like nobody's there. And if they are still there, they're probably by themselves because there ain't anybody else there. Like, so there are kind of two. Well, I suppose there's a spectrum, right, where you go from this end where it's like, we need some technology, let's just create our own platform because we believe in ourselves so much that we're better than any tech company that already exists. That's probably a bit of a misstep. To right over here, to let's go to where people are already and design for a platform that already exists, where people know how to use it inherently. It works perfectly. To somewhere in the middle, which is where Clubhouse is like, there's huge user base of people know how to use it, but it's kind of a flash in the pan. That's the dangerous bit to be. It's kind of, let's get a whole company onto Clubhouse. That'd be a really good idea. And then a month later, kind of like, oh wow, well that was a waste of time. We spent like 2 weeks doing it. And this is where the Chilango model, the plug in, plug out stuff, really resonates with me because, like, in that model, if you decided to onboard for whatever reason Clubhouse to your organization, you plug it in, and just as easy it was to plug in, it was to plug out. Therefore, there's nothing lost, nothing gained. You tried, you tested, and you learn. That's really important. Building your own stuff doesn't allow you to do that. Using someone else's stuff does allow you to do that, and probably has a higher success rate because you bet on dollar you're not going to be their first customer to have used it, and they'll have a roadmap for product development and stuff like that, and they'll have way more insight on how people interact with the platform than you will ever have on the app you build yourself. So that's the end of that statement. I don't know why I'm finishing my things with like full stops and telling you when I'm finished, but here we go.
You see, you're getting back into the Clubhouse vibe, aren't you? My name's Sam and I am done. Who remembers that? You know, and this is another point, isn't it? When you're looking at all these apps, our behavior changed overnight with Clubhouse. And I don't know how that happened, but we got to this point, and Toby, you just brought back that whole thing. And I remember sitting night after night on Clubhouse and, you know, trying to build our brand and doing all sorts of things. And, you know, my name's Sam and I am done. We've got to create, to your point earlier, chances are it's probably something that we're all already using, but it's just going to be used in a different way without changing that behavior and frankly bringing in these quite bizarre habits. And I often think, why did we all do it? But we did.
You can then compound the problem even more, again, larger companies, where you kind of go, okay, we're just talking and we've moved quite quickly through like communication and collaboration in the workplace. Now you then apply that to every other thing that maybe a HR team does within an organization, a learning experience platform, a SharePoint site, all these stacking, tech on tech on tech on tech on tech. And you're like, do you really have you truly evaluated the needs of your strategy and your audience and figured out, do you need all of that stuff? Because a learning management system, someone's only going to put in place. Well, a learning team will have put that in place because they have a need for it. An internal comms team may have put in an internal comms app because they need to placate their needs about their strategy. But if those two, like teams, people, whatever it be, talk to each other in the organization, you kind of go, well, they're pretty similar objectives, what you're trying to achieve here. Wouldn't it be in the best interest of everyone involved, our money, our time, our resource? I was doing that off camera. To make sure that we select the very best platform. And for me, that just makes sense. But you have a lot of teams out there and people trying to validate their own job roles by creating these little monolithic organizations instead of these big monolithic organizations. You're like, it's just a big pyramid scheme.
Yes. And it's kind of got me thinking back towards, some of the work that we've done, Toby, in the mastermind, which is that community that you helped me with, where we talk about future back thinking, and this is where my mind's going. We've got to get away from this is the platform, this is what we're doing it, and get the key stakeholders in a room and saying, okay, where do you want your business in 5 to 10 years time if you can do it? I mean, if companies in the East can plan up to 100 years, why do we find it so difficult in Western society to be able to do 5 to 10? That's a subject for another day. But my point here is getting the key stakeholders in the room and saying, what does your workforce look like in the next 5 to 10 years? Where are they? Who are they? How are they going to interact and connect? And then get that level of what that could look like and how you embrace that from there. Because we all know that the platforms and the technologies it's only going to accelerate. But you've got to get that strategy right first.
And I think the way to get there, I had this idea over the weekend, is that you've got to ask yourself some what if questions.
Yeah.
And I think this comes back to just ask yourself, you, your team, your stakeholders, what if we turned off internal email? What would we do? What would happen? How would our people behave? Where would they go? And does that difference look good or bad? And just that simple half-hour, 45-minute question, you come up with a lot of creative solutions with stuff that probably already exists within your organization. And to your point, Sam, increases productivity because we aren't trying to clear our inboxes on a Friday night or Monday morning to get the proper work done. So it's those what if questions about what if we only had one platform for HR? Like, which one would we pick and why? And which ones would we turn off? Because you pay bottom dollar, you turn a lot of them off. I would. I just uninstall them.
Callie.
Well, it got me thinking about all of the different system pieces and just how overwhelming that is for a new hire. One of the things that we get really excited about just as a company is I want you to be able to log into that computer for the first time and have everything ready to go. I want you to change your passwords and have your own passwords, but I don't want to spend your first day as an employee trying to get into systems and being overwhelmed by that process. And that's a good reminder in itself how many different tools you use on a given day, but how incredibly overwhelming it is for that new person to try to figure out what all they need to be interacting with. And if you can effectively streamline where everyone's going, you've got one place that's going to get you to everything else that we need to do. This is where we communicate. How much easier and is it for people to get up to speed when they can find things more effectively? They're not, I don't know, trying to figure out who is this person? Why am I engaging with them? Why did I just get 15 emails from IT? all of those things, we can just be so much more efficient and decrease that learning curve.
And in a world, we're nearly at time, but in a world where like 3-year-olds could pick up an iPad and just start using it, like, why are you not spending the time and effort to make your organization designed in that way? Don't give them a really good induction experience or plan out their training plan for the first 12 months or 12 weeks. Try and make your user interface of your organization as easy as iOS. Do that. And that will actually, there aren't many companies doing that. So do that and you'll probably win. But don't take that as like a soundbite, because like everyone, there was the whole Netflix thing. It's like, oh, we should have this like Netflix. I'm not saying make it exactly. Don't make iOS for your organization. That is the opposite of what I'm saying. But the operating system of your organization has to be as good as an operating system, not just some shonky building blocks are all scrabbled together by lots of different people with different strategic objectives.
God, we've covered a lot today. So what have we talked about? We started off with Shopify. Look how much they've saved just from a time-saving perspective with internal meetings. I'm sure they've done a lot of work as well in the emails, and I'd love to hear if anyone's worked with them, what they've done there. Toby, your points about asking that what if? What if you only had one platform? All of these kind of things we need to think about. And Callie talking about the truck drivers, I think that was a really interesting story as well, to look at not only the different generations, but how we in different roles will interact and interconnect with that internal communication piece. Who owns that and who needs to own that in the future? I think watch this space. As I said, we've seen so much happening with people like Shopify and what they're doing in terms of internal communications from a meeting perspective. We need to dig deeper and almost look at how we're using communications as a whole internally, remembering that if our 3-year-olds can use technology so well, why are we spending so much time on it in our onboarding and induction? So, final thoughts and words from you both. Callie, I'll come to you.
Think long and hard about why you do what you do and if it's serving you.
Nice. Toby.
Find where your people are and go there.
I love it. So, mine will be think Shopify and drill down from there. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. Thank you all for your ongoing DMs to the three of us. Much more to come in terms of some really spicy topics over the next few weeks. And we'll see you all next Monday. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye.